Good evening, dear friend. Come, rest yourself here beside me. The night surrounds us with its gentle darkness, and the world outside has grown beautifully quiet. You've traveled far today, through the noise and hurry of modern life, and now you deserve this moment of peace. Let me share with you a story tonight, a story from history, told softly and slowly, meant not to startle or disturb, but to guide you gently toward rest. Tonight, we journey together to understand the Korean War, walking slowly through its landscapes, meeting its people, and learning its lessons, all while the night wraps around us like a warm blanket. You find yourself standing on a quiet hillside in Korea, in the year 1945. The Second World War has just ended, and the entire world is exhaling with relief. But here, in this beautiful peninsula, something complicated is beginning. You look around and see mountains rising in the distance, their peaks touched by soft morning mist. Rice paddies stretch out below, reflecting the pale sky. Small villages dot the valleys, their thatched roofs and stone walls unchanged for generations. The air smells of earth and growing things. Everything feels ancient and peaceful. But you sense something changing, something stirring beneath this calm surface. Korea has been occupied by Japan for 35 years. The Japanese ruled harshly, trying to erase Korean culture, forcing people to speak Japanese, to take Japanese names, to abandon their traditions. But now Japan has surrendered to the Allied powers, and Korean people are finally free from this oppression. You can feel the hope in the air as you walk down from the hillside. Families are reuniting after years of separation. Old traditions are being practiced openly again for the first time in decades. The Korean language fills the streets once more, no longer forbidden. People speak excitedly about the future, about what kind of nation Korea will become now that independence has finally arrived. But freedom brings complicated questions too. What kind of country will Korea be? Who will govern this newly liberated peninsula? How will the economy be organized? What political system will emerge? And as you stand watching the sun rise over the mountains, you don't yet know that these questions will tear the peninsula apart, that the hope you feel in the air will curdle into something tragic and painful. You notice movement in the valleys below. American soldiers are arriving from the south, their uniforms unfamiliar in this landscape. Soviet soldiers are coming from the north, their presence equally foreign. The victorious Allied powers have agreed to temporarily divide Korea along the 38th parallel, an arbitrary line drawn across maps in distant offices by men who've never set foot in Korea. The Americans will accept the Japanese surrender in the south. The Soviets will handle the same task in the north. It's supposed to be temporary, just an administrative convenience to manage the surrender process. Nobody expects this line to become permanent. But you watch as this invisible boundary begins to harden, to become real, to divide not just territory but people, families, futures. You walk slowly down from the hillside into a small village as evening approaches. Families are gathering for their meals, the smoke from cooking fires rising peacefully into the darkening sky. You pause outside a traditional hanok house, its curved tile roof elegant against the twilight. Inside, an elderly man sits with his young grandson, speaking in low, worried tones. The old man remembers Korea before the Japanese came. He remembers independence, sovereignty, a unified nation. And now he wonders what this new division means. Will it truly be temporary? Will Korea be whole again soon? The grandson listens, not understanding yet how this moment will shape his entire life, how he will grow old still waiting for reunification that never comes. As months pass into years, you watch the division deepen like a wound that won't heal. In the north, Soviet advisors help establish a communist government modeled on the Soviet Union itself. A young man named Kim Il-sung rises to power, backed by the Soviets and supported by the Korean Communist Party. He's a former guerrilla fighter, charismatic, ruthless, determined to create a socialist Korea. In the South, American advisors support the creation of a separate government. Syngman Rhee becomes president, equally anti-communist, authoritarian in his own way, backed by American money and American influence. And Korea, which had been one nation for over 1,000 years, which shared one language, one culture, one history, is now two separate states with two competing visions of the future. You find yourself walking along the 38th parallel in the winter of 1949. Snow falls softly from the gray sky, covering the landscape in white silence, muffling all sound. The border is more militarized now than it was just months ago. Barbed wire stretches between guard posts, ugly scars across the pristine snow. Soldiers on both sides peer across at each other, suspicious, tense, fingers never far from their weapons. You notice families living near the border, suddenly cut off from relatives on the other side. A mother stands at the edge of her village, looking north toward where her sister lives, just a few miles away but now completely unreachable. She cannot visit. She cannot even send a letter safely. The division is no longer just political. It's personal. It's painful. It's tearing apart the fabric of Korean society. In Pyongyang, the northern capital, Kim Il-sung is building a socialist state with Soviet assistance. Factories are being nationalized, taken from private owners and placed under state control. Land is being redistributed from wealthy landlords to poor farmers. Soviet-style propaganda fills the streets, posters showing happy workers and abundant harvests. Young people are being trained in communist ideology, learning to see the world through the lens of class struggle. The government is building an army, training soldiers, stockpiling weapons, preparing for something. The rhetoric from Pyongyang grows increasingly militant, speaking of liberating the South from American imperialism, of reunifying Korea under socialism. In Seoul, the southern capital, Syngman Rhee's government is establishing its own vision, aligned with the Americans, fiercely anti-communist, developing its own military forces with American equipment and American training. The rhetoric from Seoul mirrors that from Pyongyang, speaking of liberating the North from communist tyranny, of reunifying Korea under democracy. Both governments claim to represent all of Korea. Both refuse to recognize the legitimacy of the other. And between these two competing visions, the Korean people find themselves divided, uncertain, waiting anxiously to see what will happen next. You stand in a Seoul marketplace on a warm summer morning in early 1950. Vendors sell fresh vegetables and fish, their voices calling out prices and greetings in the melodic tones of the Korean language. Children run between the stalls, laughing and playing, their joy infectious. Life continues, ordinary and precious, people going about their daily business. But there's an undercurrent of anxiety that you can feel. People speak in worried whispers about the North, about military build-up, about increasingly aggressive rhetoric, about the possibility of war. Most don't believe it will actually happen. War? Between Koreans? Between people who share the same language, the same culture, the same ancestors? Impossible. They've already suffered so much under Japanese occupation. Surely there will be peaceful reunification. Surely diplomacy will prevail. But you notice the young men disappearing into military service, called up for training. You see the tension in people's faces when news arrives from the border. The date is June 25, 1950. It's a Sunday morning, quiet and ordinary like any other Sunday. You're in a small town just south of the 38th parallel. The dawn is breaking, soft light spreading across the sky. Birds are singing their morning songs. The world feels peaceful, serene, full of the simple beauty of an early summer day. And then you hear it. In the distance. A low rumbling sound like distant thunder. Artillery fire. The ground trembles slightly beneath your feet. You see villagers emerging from their homes, confused, frightened, looking north toward the sound. Soldiers are running through the streets, shouting orders that you can't quite make out. And word spreads quickly through the town like wildfire. North Korean forces have crossed the border in massive numbers. The war has begun. You watch as North Korean tanks and soldiers pour southward like a flood. They've been planning this for months, preparing carefully, stockpiling ammunition, positioning forces. The attack is swift, coordinated, overwhelming in its intensity. South Korean forces, caught by surprise on a peaceful Sunday morning, fall back in confusion and disarray. The North Korean People's Army has Soviet tanks, Soviet artillery, Soviet training. They advance rapidly down the peninsula, capturing town after town. Within 3 days, they've captured Seoul. The South Korean government flees southward in panic. Refugees clog the roads, hundreds of thousands of families carrying whatever they can, heading south, away from the fighting, away from the unknown. You walk among them, seeing the fear in their eyes, the bewilderment on their faces. Just days ago, life was normal. They were tending their fields, running their shops, raising their children. Now everything is collapsing around them. In Washington, halfway around the world, President Harry Truman receives the news with alarm and anger. He sees this North Korean invasion as communist aggression, as a test of American resolve in the Cold War. The world is watching to see how America will respond. If South Korea falls without American intervention, what message does that send to the Soviet Union, to communist movements everywhere? That aggression pays? That America won't defend its allies? Truman decides quickly that America must intervene. He works to get the United Nations Security Council to authorize military action, taking advantage of a Soviet boycott of the UN to push through the resolution. American forces begin deploying to Korea within days. You watch as American soldiers arrive at the port of Busan in the southeast, young men mostly, many having never left America before, now finding themselves in a war on the other side of the world in a place they can barely pronounce, fighting for a cause they don't fully understand. Through the long, hot summer of July and August 1950, you watch the fighting compress into a shrinking area around Busan, the last remaining foothold of South Korea and its American allies. The Busan Perimeter, they call it. A roughly rectangular defensive line protecting the southeastern corner of the peninsula. North Korean forces press hard against this perimeter from all sides, trying to push the defenders into the sea, trying to complete their conquest of the south. The fighting is desperate, intense. American and South Korean soldiers dig in, hold their positions against repeated attacks. But the defenders hold. Supplies arrive by ship at Busan's port. Reinforcements arrive. And American air power begins to make a crucial difference, bombing North Korean supply lines, destroying bridges, making it difficult for the North to sustain their offensive. You watch American planes fly overhead day after day, their engines roaring across the sky. In Tokyo, General Douglas MacArthur studies his maps and plans a bold counterattack. You see him in his headquarters, this legendary commander now 70 years old, confident almost to the point of arrogance, certain of his own military genius. He plans an amphibious landing at Incheon, far behind North Korean lines, near Seoul on the west coast. It's extremely risky. The tides at Incheon are some of the most extreme in the world, making an amphibious assault difficult and dangerous. The harbor itself presents numerous challenges. His own staff tries to talk him out of it. But MacArthur insists it will work, that the very difficulty of the operation means the North Koreans won't expect it. And on September 15, 1950, you watch as the landing begins. Ships approach the harbor in the early morning light. Marines wade ashore against light resistance. And against all odds, against the predictions of many, it succeeds brilliantly. Seoul is recaptured within days. North Korean forces suddenly find themselves cut off from their supply lines, trapped between American forces landing at Incheon and forces breaking out of the Pusan perimeter. The entire war reverses almost overnight. You watch as South Korean and American forces push northward, pursuing the retreating and disintegrating North Korean army. The momentum has completely shifted. By October, UN forces have crossed the 38th parallel, pushing into North Korea itself. The objective is no longer just defending South Korea but destroying the North Korean state, reunifying Korea under a pro-American government. By late October, American forces are approaching the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and China. Victory seems tantalizingly close. The war might end quickly with total victory. Korea might be unified under South Korea and its American allies. But you sense something ominous in the cold wind blowing from the north. A warning. A danger that nobody seems to be taking seriously enough. Chinese leaders in Beijing are watching nervously as American forces approach their border. They don't want an American-allied Korea right on their doorstep. They've sent warnings through diplomatic channels that if American forces get too close to the Yalu River, China will have no choice but to intervene to protect its security. MacArthur dismisses these warnings as empty threats, as bluffing. He doesn't believe China will actually enter the war. He assures President Truman that Chinese intervention is unlikely, and if it happens, American air power will destroy any Chinese forces that cross the Yalu. But in late October and early November of 1950, Chinese forces begin crossing the Yalu River in massive numbers. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers. They move primarily at night, hiding during the day in villages and forests to avoid American air strikes. They're experienced, tough soldiers, many veterans of the Chinese Civil War that just ended. They attack suddenly and in overwhelming force, using human wave tactics, blowing bugles and horns to create confusion and terror. American and South Korean forces, caught completely by surprise, begin a long, bitter retreat. The tide of war has reversed yet again, this time even more dramatically than before. The winter of 1950 to 1951 is brutally cold, one of the harshest winters in memory. Snow and ice cover the mountains. Temperatures drop far below zero, to 20, 30, even 40 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Soldiers on all sides suffered terribly from the cold. Frostbite is as much an enemy as the opposing forces. You walk among retreating American soldiers, and you see their exhaustion, their frostbitten fingers and faces, their hunger and fear. Many have lost friends in the fighting. They trudge through deep snow, carrying wounded comrades on improvised stretchers, trying to stay ahead of pursuing Chinese forces. Equipment freezes. Weapons jam. Vehicles won't start. The cold is merciless. You witness the famous retreat from the Chosin Reservoir, where 15,000 American Marines fight their way out of a massive Chinese encirclement in some of the worst winter conditions imaginable. Surrounded by 10 Chinese divisions, outnumbered perhaps 5 to 1, in temperatures that drop to 30 below zero, the Marines fight a running battle for 2 weeks, fighting during the day, marching at night, never stopping, never surrendering. It's called a fighting retreat, and Marine commanders insist they're advancing in a different direction, but it's devastating nonetheless. Thousands die from combat and from the cold. But most of the Marines make it out, bringing their wounded and even their dead with them, refusing to leave anyone behind. By January 1951, Chinese and North Korean forces have pushed deep into South Korea, far south of the 38th parallel. Seoul changes hands for the third time in the war, now falling to Chinese forces. It seems like the entire war might be lost, like South Korea might be completely overrun. The UN forces retreat to defensive positions south of Seoul. But then something changes. The Chinese forces, now far from their supply bases in Manchuria, begin to run out of ammunition and food. Their offensive slows, then stops. And American and South Korean forces, reorganized and reinforced, stop retreating and begin pushing back again. Through the spring of 1951, UN forces slowly advance northward again. Seoul is recaptured once more in March, changing hands for the fourth and final time. The fighting is intense, but by spring, the front line has stabilized roughly along the 38th parallel, almost exactly where the war started 10 months earlier. And there, remarkably, it stays. The war of rapid movement is over. Now it becomes something different, something grimmer. It becomes a war of position, of trenches and bunkers and fortified hills, resembling the Western Front of World War I more than the mobile warfare of World War II. You find yourself in the summer of 1951, standing on a ridge overlooking a valley. Below, soldiers are digging trenches, stringing barbed wire, building bunkers and fortifications. The war has become static, frozen in place. Small hills are fought over repeatedly, changing hands multiple times, with heavy casualties on both sides but little strategic significance. The names of these hills mean nothing to anyone except the men who fight and die there. Heartbreak Ridge, Bloody Ridge, Pork Chop Hill. Each one a small piece of ground, bought with blood, held for a while, sometimes lost, sometimes retaken. The fighting continues, but the front line barely moves. Month after month, the same positions are attacked and defended. Attacked and defended. Meanwhile, peace talks begin in July 1951, first at Keesong, then moving to Panmunjom, a small village on the border. You sit quietly in the corner of the negotiation tent, watching diplomats and military officers from both sides talk. And talk. And talk. The negotiations drag on for 2 years while men continue dying on the hills. The main sticking point is prisoners of war. Thousands of Chinese and North Korean prisoners held by the UN forces don't want to return to communist rule. They fear persecution, even execution, if they're repatriated. The Americans insist that prisoners should have the right to choose whether to return home or not. The communists insist that all prisoners must be repatriated, that anything else is kidnapping. And so the talks stall, deadlock, resume, stall again. And while diplomats argue about principles, soldiers continue killing each other over meaningless hilltops. You spend time with an American soldier named Jimmy, from a small farm in Iowa. He's 19 years old, fresh-faced despite the dirt and exhaustion. He's been in Korea for 8 months now. He writes letters home to his mother every week, describing the landscape, the cold in winter and heat in summer, the strange food, the boredom punctuated by moments of absolute terror. He doesn't really understand why he's here, halfway around the world, fighting people he has no personal quarrel with. He doesn't hate the enemy. He just wants to go home, to go back to the farm, to marry his high school sweetheart, to have a normal life. You watch him one morning as he shares a cigarette with another soldier, talking about baseball, about girls, about cars, about anything except the war. And then the order comes to take another hill, and Jimmy picks up his rifle and goes, because that's what soldiers do. You also spend time with a North Korean soldier named Park from a small village near Pyongyang. He's 22, serious and quiet. He was drafted, had no choice in the matter. He believes in Korean reunification but isn't sure this war is the way to achieve it. He misses his family desperately, his mother and father, his younger sister, his girlfriend who promised to wait for him. He misses his peaceful life before all this, working in his father's shop, going to school, dreaming about the future. You watch him one evening, sitting in a bunker carved into a hillside, carefully cleaning his weapon by candlelight, thinking about home, wondering if he'll survive this war, if he'll ever see his family again, if his girlfriend is still waiting. And you spend time with Korean civilians, caught in the middle of this war, suffering regardless of which side controls their village. An old woman in a village that's changed hands 4 times during the war. She's tired, deeply tired in a way that goes beyond physical exhaustion. Tired of soldiers, tired of war, tired of fear and uncertainty. She just wants to tend her small garden, to live quietly in the home where she was born, where she raised her children. But soldiers keep coming, first from the north, then from the south, then from the north again. They demand food, demand loyalty, demand information. They bring death and destruction with them. Her eldest grandson was killed in the fighting last year. Her house has been damaged by artillery shells. She endures because she has no choice, because she's too old to flee, because this is her home and she refuses to abandon it. The seasons pass in their eternal cycle. Summer heat makes the trenches stifling, unbearable. Fall brings cool relief and stunning colors to the mountains, the leaves turning red and gold. Winter snow covers everything in white, beautiful and deadly. Spring flowers bloom in no man's land between the trenches, oblivious to the war. And still the war continues, grinding on month after month. Still men die fighting over hills that have no names that anyone will remember. You walk the trenches, observing the routine of war. The endless waiting. The gnawing fear. The brief, violent eruptions of combat. The long periods of crushing boredom. You notice how young the soldiers are on both sides, how similar they look when they're asleep or scared or wounded. The war has taken on a life of its own, continuing through sheer momentum even though nobody can really explain anymore what they're fighting for. In March 1953, something changes. Joseph Stalin dies in Moscow, the Soviet dictator who has dominated communist policy for decades. This changes the political calculations. The new Soviet leadership, unsure of their position, wants to reduce international tensions, to consolidate power at home. They want to end the war in Korea, which is expensive and increasingly pointless. The Chinese, too, are ready to end it. The war has cost them dearly, hundreds of thousands of casualties, enormous expenditure of resources. And so the negotiations at Panmunjom gain new momentum. Compromises that were impossible before suddenly become possible. Agreements begin to take shape. On July 27, 1953, an armistice agreement is signed. Not a peace treaty, which would require political settlements that remain impossible. Just a ceasefire, an agreement to stop shooting at each other. Korea remains divided, split at roughly the 38th parallel, almost exactly where the division was before the war started 3 years earlier. A demilitarized zone is established, a buffer strip 2.5 miles wide running across the entire peninsula. No military forces are allowed in the DMZ. It's meant to prevent accidental clashes, to create space between the two sides. And at last, finally, the guns fall silent. You stand in that sudden silence, and it feels strange, almost wrong. After 3 years of almost constant gunfire, the absence of shooting sounds eerie. Soldiers on both sides are relieved, exhausted, numb with fatigue and trauma. They've survived. So many of their friends haven't. Over 3 million people died in this war. Most of them were Korean civilians, caught in the crossfire, killed by artillery, bombed from the air, executed by one side or the other for suspected collaboration. Entire cities lie in ruins. Villages have been destroyed. Families have been separated. The landscape is scarred with trenches, pockmarked with shell craters. And for what? The border is almost exactly where it was before the war started. 3 years of fighting. 3 million dead. And nothing has really changed except that the division is now harder, more militarized, more permanent. American soldiers prepare to go home. They board ships and planes, leaving Korea behind, taking their memories and nightmares with them. Chinese soldiers march back across the Yalu River to China. But North Korean and South Korean soldiers stay, facing each other across the DMZ, which will remain one of the most heavily militarized borders in the world for decades to come. And Korean families remain divided, separated by a border that's now almost impossible to cross. Brothers who fought on opposite sides and can never see each other again. Parents separated from children. Wives from husbands. The division that was supposed to be temporary in 1945 is now permanent, hardened by 3 years of brutal warfare into something that seems unchangeable. You walk through Seoul in the years after the war ends. The city is slowly being rebuilt from its ruins. People are trying to resume normal lives, to pick up the pieces, to move forward. But the scars are everywhere. Physical scars in the damaged and destroyed buildings, entire neighborhoods still in rubble. Emotional scars in the people themselves. War widows struggling to support their children alone. Orphans living on the streets, begging for food. Men missing arms and legs, veterans crippled by the war. Everyone has lost someone. Everyone carries trauma. But life goes on because it must. Markets reopen. Schools resume classes. Children are born. And gradually, very gradually, South Korea begins the long process of recovery and rebuilding. In the north, the recovery is slower and more difficult. The American bombing campaign was devastating to North Korea. Cities were systematically destroyed. Pyongyang was bombed to rubble. Virtually every significant town and industrial facility was hit. The infrastructure of roads, bridges, railways, power plants was shattered. The North Korean government, under Kim Il-sung, becomes increasingly isolated from the outside world, increasingly repressive toward its own people. The personality cult around Kim grows more extreme. The militarization of society intensifies. Every resource is poured into rebuilding the military, into ensuring that North Korea can defend itself, into preparing for the next war that leaders insist is inevitable. The division from the south deepens into permanent, bitter hostility. The Korean War fades from American consciousness very quickly. It's overshadowed by World War II, which came before it and seems more significant, more clearly justified. It's overshadowed by Vietnam, which comes after it and becomes far more controversial, more divisive in American society. Korea becomes the forgotten war, squeezed between two larger conflicts in American memory. American veterans of Korea often feel their service is overlooked, unappreciated. But the war is certainly not forgotten by Koreans. How could it be? The division remains. The pain remains. the separation of millions of families remains. It's not history for them. It's present reality. You move forward through the decades, watching South Korea transform in ways that seem almost miraculous. From a war-torn, desperately impoverished nation in the 1950s, it becomes an economic powerhouse by the 1980s and 90s. Democracy eventually replaces the series of military dictatorships that ruled for decades. Seoul becomes a gleaming modern megacity of millions. Korean culture spreads globally. K-pop music, Korean dramas and films, Korean technology companies. It's an amazing transformation, a testament to the resilience and determination of the Korean people. Meanwhile, North Korea follows the opposite trajectory, becoming one of the most isolated, repressive, impoverished states on Earth. The contrast between the two Koreas becomes starker with each passing year, until they seem like different civilizations rather than divided parts of one nation. But the war never officially ended. The armistice of 1953 is just a pause in the fighting, not a peace settlement. Technically, legally, North and South Korea remain at war to this day. The DMZ remains, still heavily fortified, still one of the most dangerous borders in the world. And families remain separated. Elderly people on both sides have lived their entire adult lives hoping to see relatives they were separated from during the war. Some eventually get to meet briefly in carefully controlled reunions organized by the governments. But most never do. Most die still hoping, still waiting, still grieving for the family members they lost in 1950. You stand at the DMZ in the present day, looking across this strange landscape. It's the most militarized border in the world, bristling with weapons, guarded by thousands of troops on both sides. But it's also, ironically, a nature preserve. Because humans can't enter most of it, because it's been largely untouched for 70 years, wildlife thrives here. Rare birds nest in the DMZ. Endangered species of plants and animals that have disappeared from the rest of Korea still survive in this accidental sanctuary. Nature has reclaimed what humans fought over so bitterly. There's something poetic about that. And something profoundly sad. The Korean War changed the world in ways that still echo today. It established the pattern of Cold War conflict that would repeat in Vietnam and elsewhere. Proxy wars where the superpowers support opposing sides without directly fighting each other. Limited wars fought for limited objectives with limited means. It showed that the post-World War II settlement could be violently challenged. It led to the permanent expansion of American military presence in Asia, with thousands of American troops still stationed in South Korea 70 years later. It entrenched the division of Korea in ways that seemed temporary in 1945 but have proven remarkably durable. It shaped the geopolitics of East Asia for generations. But beyond the geopolitics, beyond the large historical forces and strategic considerations, there are the personal stories. The soldier who came home with what we'd now call PTSD but then had no name, who couldn't sleep without nightmares, who startled at loud noises, who could never quite adjust to civilian life. The mother who never saw her daughter again after the family was separated in the chaos of war. The child who grew up in an orphanage, never knowing what happened to his parents, carrying that uncertainty his whole life. The veteran who couldn't talk about what he'd seen and done, who kept it locked inside for 50 years. The refugee who fled south with nothing and built a new life through determination and hard work. These personal stories are the real history, more true than any strategic analysis or political explanation. The human cost. The individual tragedies. The small moments of courage and kindness and endurance in the midst of horror. As you walk back through the decades, back to that quiet hillside in 1945 where our journey began, you understand the tragedy more fully now. You see how a temporary division made for administrative convenience became permanent through a combination of ideological conflict, great power rivalry, and the momentum of war itself. How political decisions made in distant capitals by people who knew little about Korea tore apart a peninsula and its people. How a war that was supposed to reunify Korea only deepened its division, made it seemingly permanent. How 3 years of bitter fighting achieved almost nothing except death and destruction, with the border ending up almost exactly where it started. How the Korean War was in many ways the first modern limited war, fought with restraint by the standards of World War II, but still devastating to the people who lived through it. But you also see resilience in this story. The Korean people, North and South, endured suffering that would have broken many societies. They survived. They rebuilt from almost total destruction. They created new lives, new societies, new cultures out of the ruins. They maintained their language, their cultural identity, their sense of being Korean despite everything that was done to them, despite decades of division. They hoped. They persevered. They found ways to go on living even when hope seemed impossible. And that resilience, that refusal to give up, is worth remembering and honoring. The night is deeper now, friend. Your breathing has slowed into the gentle rhythm of approaching sleep. The story has unfolded before you like a scroll being carefully unrolled, and we've walked through it together, you and I. From that first hopeful morning after liberation in 1945 to the bitter division that remains today. We've met soldiers on both sides, young men who just wanted to go home. We've met civilians caught in the crossfire, enduring what they could not change. We've stood on frozen mountains and in destroyed cities. We've witnessed suffering and courage, cruelty and kindness, all the contradictory complexity of human nature revealed by war. And now it's time to rest. Tomorrow morning, the sun will rise on a world where the Korean Peninsula is still divided, where the DMZ still separates families, where the armistice of 1953 still holds but peace remains elusive. But tonight, here in this quiet moment, you can rest from all of that. You've learned. You've understood something important about history, about war, about the human capacity for both destruction and resilience. You've honored the memory of those who suffered by taking the time to understand their story. And now, as the story fades like morning mist in sunlight, you can let it all go. Let the names and dates and battles drift away like leaves on a stream. Let the complex politics and military strategy recede into comfortable distance. What remains is the human truth at the heart of it all. That war divides while peace unites. That separation brings pain while reunion brings joy. That ordinary people endure extraordinary circumstances with quiet courage. That hope persists even in the darkest times. And that's enough wisdom to carry with you into sleep, gentle truths to rest upon. Close your eyes now, dear friend. Feel the quiet of the night surrounding you like a soft blanket. Know that in listening to this story, in taking the time to understand what happened in Korea all those years ago, you've honored the memory of everyone who lived through it. The soldiers who fought, not because they hated the enemy but because they were ordered to. The civilians who suffered, whose lives were disrupted or destroyed by events beyond their control. The families who were separated and who wait still, even now, for reunion. They're remembered. Their stories have been told. And that matters. Now you can sleep. Deep, peaceful, restful sleep. The kind of sleep that comes after a long journey. You've traveled far tonight, across decades and across a peninsula, through war and division and the long aftermath. And now you're home. Safe. Warm. Ready to rest. Let history settle into your mind gently, not as a burden but as understanding. Let it become part of the deep knowing you carry about the world and human nature. Let it inform your appreciation for peace, for connection, for the precious gift of an undivided life. Sleep now, dear friend. Sleep deeply and well. Let the night embrace you. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Let your muscles relax completely. Let your mind drift into peaceful darkness. Tomorrow will bring new light, new challenges, new opportunities. But tonight belongs to rest, to peace, to the gentle quiet that follows understanding. The Korean War has been told. Its lessons have been learned. Its people have been remembered. And now, you sleep. Good night.